Welcome to 734 Games, and today, this is Game Time, and we are playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and you all know why. Recently, Final Fantasy Remake was released for free on PSN. Now, this is a game I fully was going to wait for the PC version to drop on Steam or GOG, but Sony gave us a present, so I'm showing you this on a PlayStation 4 Pro, but okay, of course it's only in 1080p because that's what I'm recording on my PlayStation with, 1080p. So before I get started, my nephew, he is getting cancer treatments. His Gofundme is in the description. Check that out. Any money given to this channel will go to that. Now let's get started with some Final Fantasy VII Remake. The funny thing about Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PlayStation 4 is that this is a game that lived in myth for a very long time. This game was a myth from the PlayStation community since before the launch of the PlayStation 3. Remember, after the unveiling of the PlayStation 3, people were talking about this game coming out, a Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, I don't know if Square was planning on something like that back then, or if that was just something the PlayStation community was wishing for and wishfully thinking for, but we eventually got a Final Fantasy VII Remake done on the same engine pretty much that Final Fantasy 15 was done on. Final Fantasy 15 had a great open world. It was actually a good game until the end game. Once you hit the end game, that game falls flat on its face, at least in my opinion. Final Fantasy VII is obviously not like that because it's based on Final Fantasy VII. So what you have is a very front-loaded game, a game that's a lot more front-loaded than Final Fantasy 15 was. And then, of course, the game continues on pretty strong. Final Fantasy games were always big and epic from the start. And that's one reason Final Fantasy got its reputation around the world. And Final Fantasy VII really changed everything for Sony. Sony had released the PlayStation, their first system, and Nintendo, they released another system, and everyone's like, oh, the Nintendo 64 is just going to be the biggest thing ever. And Final Fantasy came out and basically crushed the Nintendo 64. It was a good system, it had a few good games, but it could not stand up to Final Fantasy VII. And Final Fantasy VII was actually supposed to be on Nintendo, but Nintendo went with cartridges, so Final Fantasy, the Square Enix, they saw what Sony was working with CDs, and they said, that's the technology we need to move forward, not these cartridges. So they decided to go with Sony and the PlayStation 1. So like Final Fantasy 15, what you have here is a dynamic, real-time RPG fighting engine that's pretty decent. I think it's a lot more polished than it was with Final Fantasy 15. So, I mean, this game definitely is a lot better. And if you're looking from a technical level, graphically, this game is well beyond 15. Now, beyond the fighting engine in Final Fantasy VII Remake, the graphics in Final Fantasy VII Remake are light years ahead of Final Fantasy 15. I mean, the lighting and everything is actually pretty phenomenal. I played this game first with the graphics card, or with my capture card. My capture card only captures in 1080p, and you do not get HDR. So you're not going to get HDR in my videos. You probably don't have HDR in any of my videos. I'm pretty sure you don't. But you're not seeing this game in HDR with 1080p, but on the screen the game looked great. 1080p, no HDR, pretty much performance mode. The game ran great, looked great, everything about it. I totally enjoyed the game. And they didn't go super easy on the combat. I mean, I think the game is easy enough to be accessible to most people and just hard enough to give you a little bit of a challenge. And I kind of like that. I think it's a little harder than 15 at first, and I like that in a good way. There were some things, I mean, 15 was a really cool game, and I love that the big expansive open world, and that's one thing you don't get in this game. You kind of get a more corridor-style open world. That has to do with the game's original design. The game's original design was obviously going to be a little bit more corridor-based. This game was originally done in, 1997. In 1997, they didn't have big expansive open worlds like 15. But this game looks so much better than 15. And I'm just really impressed with it so far. I played a little bit. I'm showing you this demo, and I played a few more hours of it, and I'm really enjoying it. And you get to go around and do the infamous hunts that you have in Final Fantasy, different beasts and such. And I'm really enjoying that. And I'm hoping that, obviously, I'm pretty sure that the end game is going to stack up. The only thing is that they're releasing this in different increments. So this is not the entire game of Final Fantasy VII Remade. And of course, if you don't have a PS5, there's certain DLC that is not you can't get on the PlayStation 4, which is crazy because there's not a lot of PlayStation 5s out there, so they're really limiting their audience in doing that. But well, what can you say? That is the decision of Square Enix, and that's what they did. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this episode. I'm going to cover Final Fantasy VII Remake again because I'm definitely going to play through this first installment, and I'm definitely going to play through all the installments. But I'm going to get back to you with some videos. Definitely, guys, expect some Final Fantasy videos, Final Fantasy VII Remake videos in the future. This is your host, Tom, signing off from GameTime at 734 Games, where gaming is alive.